Hello everybody and welcome to session 2 of our child development unit. So in this session we are going to be looking at the kind of thing that's going to affect children's learning and development. Okay, so just to recap, hopefully in session 1 we explored neurological development. So we talked about nature and nurture and how this impacts on children's growing brains. We also looked at what kind of things triggered brain activity and how the brain sends the messages through those neural pathways. And we also looked at the need for really strong foundations for future learning and how children build and develop and grow from these initial responses. Okay, so just to have a little thought of the day on that. So scientists have recently determined that it takes approximately 400 repetitions to form those neural pathways in our brain, unless it's done with play. So the more children have experiences to play, it only takes about 10 to 20 repetitions to be able to form that really strong bridge in the brain. So that just shows how important play is for children and young children. And basically scientists are also saying that you could rewire your own brain even as an adult by recalling 3 things that you're grateful for, and doing that over a period of 21 days, that you can actually turn the shape of your brain round even as an adult, so that the stronger those neural pathways are to make those happier connections. So there's just a little thought for the session. So over the course of this video we are going to talk about what kind of factors affect children's development, and we're going to talk about how and why they do. We're also going to look at disability, and we're going to consider the impact that might have. And then we're going to take all that information and we are going to look about how we can help children to access support to be able to develop to their full potential. And that's something that we call the early intervention criteria. And again, that's something that we'll explore a lot more as we go on through. I know you guys love my drawing, my amazing drawing, so I will be drawing today as well. Sorry about that. Okay, so effects on development. So again, the PowerPoint will be alongside this video and hopefully it will help make a bit more sense of things. So there are lots of different things that children can experience and go through, and we're not just talking about how they're going to have a negative impact on their development, they could also have a positive impact as well. And we do have control over lots of different factors that are going on for a child's life or a young person's life. So that obviously means we can put changes in place once we've identified those issues, as long as they're picked up quickly enough. Okay. And if we have a good understanding of what children need to be able to grow and develop, then obviously we can put that knowledge into practice to be able to support children and any individual needs that they might have. And being aware of how the negative things can impact on development will help you understand why some children don't develop as they should be, as they're expected to, and obviously make sure that we put effective support in place to be able to help this. Okay, so like we said, not all things are going to be negative. Some things have a massive positive impact on children and the experiences that they have. So again, that's the whole nature nurture that we introduced in the last thing. So we're going to be talking about the nurture now, the things that are going on for children to be able to shape the way their brains learn and develop. Okay, so what kind of things could impact on a child as they grow and develop? So when we talk about child development, we look at something called piles, and we're not talking about the things that grow on your bum when you're sitting down for too long. So piles is an acronym. So acronym is a series of letters that stand for something to be able to help us to remember something. So for PILES, it's going to help us remember P for physical development, I for intellectual or cognitive development. So again, in the last session, we introduced the concept of intellectual and cognitive development. So that's the way we think and we make sense of the world around us, and we learn from those experiences. So that's our P and that's our I. L is our language and our communication development. E is our emotional development, and S is our social development. Okay, so those different things make up the acronym of PILES. That's going to help us remember that. And unfortunately, I'm going to talk about PILES an awful lot. Glamorous, eh? Okay, so there are different things that children and young people experience, and even as a fetus, so as the baby developing inside the womb of the fetus, even things like that can have an impact on the way the brain is shaped and the way the body grows and develops as well. Okay, so the nutrition that the fetus receives, so the kind of things that the expectant mother is eating and drinking, can have an impact on the way that fetus grows inside the body. The mother's mental health, both as the baby is developing and when the baby is first born as well, can have a massive impact on those different areas of learning. So flicking back to the nutrition, the kind of things that the mother is eating, that could in turn impact on the physical development. So the P part of our PILES, if the mum is not eating and getting the correct nutrients as the baby is growing inside of her, then that could impact and maybe stunt the baby's growth. Or if they are overeating or something like that, then that could impact the baby as well, because they might be obese even from birth. The mental health as well could have a massive impact on the brain development and how the child sees the world, because of the experiences that they also are receiving. Also the emotional connection, again, that's something that we're exploring in a lot more detail as we go on through this series, so it's just us introducing the concept at the moment. The emotional support that a child is have, if the mother has postnatal depression, they might not be meeting the child's needs, okay? So therefore, the experiences that they're having and the responses that they learn from the parent are all going to be impacted and all going to be shaped from those very early days. Okay, and again, that will also impact on their social development of how they form relationships moving forward. So again, if unfortunately mum was a drug user or things like that, again, that's going to have an impact on the PILES. It could stunt growth. It could have an impact on the way the baby's brain is developing. It could therefore go on to impact the way their language develops later in life because of those things that were happening. So there's lots of things on the PowerPoint. We won't discuss everyone in turn and our Babylon, but they all go on to impact all these different areas of learning. So even as a fetus, a baby inside the mother, it's really important to get these things right and to get these things balanced, because even from a very, very early age, it impacts on the way the brain is forming and the experiences that that child is receiving already. Okay, so moving on then, so personal factors are things that we talk about that impacts the child's immediate life. Okay, so things that are very personal to only them. So that could be things like mum and dad having a new baby, so there's going to be a new sibling on the scene. So that personal factor again, could be taken as a positive, it could be taken as a negative. So some children might think that's absolutely amazing that they're about to be a big brother or sister, and it might be the making of them, and supported correctly, that's fantastic. However, that could have a massive impact on the child if you weren't supporting them through that period properly, because it might have an impact on the care that they're receiving, because obviously they are giving baby a lot more attention. So therefore the amount of language that it hears and around them would start becoming delayed. The bond that they have with their parent may become broken, so that impacts on their emotional and their social development. So there's lots of different things that are happening in their immediate life that could impact on their development. And again, that might be something, if we think back to our safeguarding sessions that we've done, it might be something like they're experiencing abuse. So they might be experiencing physical abuse at home, and therefore, because of all those things that are going on, they become very withdrawn. All those things that we were looking at, those telltale signs, those behaviour, those characteristics, they are going to in turn have an impact on the way the child is learning and developing and the experiences that they have. So that whole nature versus nurture. So nature might have presented them with a fantastic set of DNA. They might have very intelligent parents. They might be born into a very nice lifestyle, but actually it's an abusive lifestyle. So the experiences that the child is having is therefore going to be shaping the way they learn and develop, and those piles. So that physical, the intellectual or cognitive, the way their language develops, and their emotional and their social development. Okay. There are also lots of external things. So what's happening outside the child's immediate life that could have an impact on the way that they learn. So that could be things like the community in which they live in. That's not something that you can obviously initially help control. They might be living in a very poor housing situation. They might be living in a very rough neighbourhood, and therefore the impact of all those things that are going on around them is going to have an impact on those really important things, those piles. So if they are seeing poverty, and they are living in an area that might be highly vandalized and things like that, they're not getting much sleep because of the constant house parties going on down the street, or there might be drug users in the street and things like that that's keeping them awake at night. So therefore those things that are impacting on their sleep is impacting the way their body is being able to rest at night, and to be able to, and then they're growing and things like that. So all that physical development, that's going to have an impact. If they're not sleeping properly because of those things that are happening, it's going to affect their brain and how they process information and how they store information, because it's not giving them time to switch off and go through and store that information properly. They could be too tired then to go into school the next day to be able to learn all those new skills and practice those things, to be able to give them secure neural pathways and to be able to help their brain to grow. It's going to impact on their social skills, because they might not want to form relationships with people in their class and develop those relationships because they're too ashamed to bring them back to this housing situation that might be in and things like that. So that whole nurture, that environment is going to be impacting on the way that children learn, both personally with things that impact their immediate life and external things that are going on outside their immediate life. Okay. So, but it's not just negative, it could be really positive. Some children might live in those situations and think, do you know what? I'm not going to continue in this vicious circle. I want to strive and make something better for myself. So that might become a massive motivator for them to learn and develop and get out of that situation themselves. So for everything, there's a positive and a negative. It depends how they are being supported through that with their relationships with you in the early years and at school, and what they do with that. Okay, so that whole nature versus nurture. Okay. So another thing that we're going to look at is the effects that stress have upon brain development. Okay, so even from a very, very early age, babies get stressed. Okay, stress is a normal part of everyday life. Okay, and when we manage that properly, it can support positive development. Okay, and it can help children to develop healthy stress responses. Okay, babies cannot regulate themselves. It is the job of caregivers to be able to respond sensitively and to address those needs. Drawing time. I know you all love my drawing. Right, let me see if I can even find some paper. I have to pause a second. Okay, lucky you, I found some paper. Okay. So, life is full of ups and downs. Okay, this is why we're missing having a whiteboard. Okay, so when we experience a stressful situation, obviously our hormones and our stress responses go up. So even for babies, that might, because they can't regulate this up and down, they haven't got that brain development to be able to know that it's okay. They haven't got that long-term memory to be able to process and make sense of what's going on around them quite yet, because you're going to help shape that. Okay, so there's our stressful situation. It might be for a baby that they are hungry. So therefore for them, that is a very stressful situation. How you respond to children up here and how you give them the skills to be able to make sense of what's going on around them helps this curve then, this up and this down, to be able to help children, to be able to help children return to a normal state and to not dip down into stages of depression and feeling that they're not worthy and things like that. So we want to keep children at a healthy level with some bumps in the road, but they're going to make sense of that. So you working along here to be able to help children regulate that is called something called resilience. And you will get sick and tired of me babbling on through all my different sessions that I work with you about resilience and how important it is to be able to give children those skills to be able to bounce back from something that might have gone wrong for them. So it's really important that you're always there for them and that you're giving them genuine responses to be able to meet their needs and to be able to help them process what's going on around them and to be able to make sense and to be able to move forward with different things so that they don't just think they're a failure. They do believe in themselves. They've got somebody in their corner. So even at a very early age, you responding to a baby's needs of crying because they're hungry or they're just not sure of what's going on around them, they don't know how to communicate, so they get stressed. They want to have a response from you. So you helping babies regulate and make sense of what's going on around them and giving that warm, appropriate response to them and meeting their needs is already at that very early age helping to build a child's resilience. And each session that we will go through, we will build up your knowledge in different areas of why it is so important to help build a child's resilience and what impact that has if you don't do that. Okay, so just as a very quick introduction, there's going to be a negative impact on development if you are leaving babies at that stressed state and that you are not going to them and you're not meeting their need. Okay, So if you are leaving babies for a long period of time, we're not just talking about helping them to settle to sleep as a one-off, we're talking prolonged experiences of stress, and you are not meeting their need, they actually realize that what's the point of doing that? So even from a very early age, they figure that there's no point in me crying because I'm hungry or I'm thirsty or I need my nappy changing, because nobody is going to come and meet my need. Okay. And the amount of stress that you put the baby's brain under by not meeting that need is actually going to have a massive impact. And again, that's something that we'll look at in a lot more detail when we talk about attachment theory and things like that. So even from a very early age, stress and not meeting children's needs has a massive impact on the way they develop. Okay, so moving on now, we're going to look at disabilities and how they could impact on a child's development. So when we talk about disability, we are not just saying that a child might be handicapped and they might be in a wheelchair or something like that. So under the Equality Act 2010, which again is something that we will look at a lot more detail when we do our equality and diversity unit. So the definition, so the description of what exactly that means is you have a physical or mental impairment. Okay, if there was a little pause in there, it is because my sister has bought me some coffee and biscuits. Anyway, so under the Equality Act, you are defined as having a disability if you have a physical or mental impairment that has a substantial and long-term negative effect on your ability to do normal day-to-day activities. Okay, I'm not going to babble too much about that because there is a nice definition on the PowerPoint. Okay, so models of disabilities. There are two types of models of disabilities that we refer to when we work with children, and they actually go hand in hand with each other. So when we talk about disability and supporting children with disability, we talk about the medical model and the social model of disability. So the medical model is when children have a formal diagnosis of a disability. So they have had lots of assessments done on them, they've seen lots of specialist people, and that somebody has given them an official medical diagnosis of a disability. Okay. A social model of disability is when society recognises that the child might have an area of need and they adapt what they're doing to be able to meet the child's needs. Okay, so if we think about our workplace, so our nursery, our early year setting, or our school that we work in, we very much follow the social model of disability, that we recognise that children might have an area that they're struggling with, and actually we adapt our practice without even thinking about it sometimes to be able to support that child's need. So it might be that they have a speech and language problem, so therefore the instructions that we give in a main classroom environment are going to be too much for that child to process. They can't make sense of that. They haven't got that level of understanding. So therefore they might need somebody to be sitting with them to be breaking down those instructions a lot more. And that still applies, just because I've said classroom, that still applies to an early year setting as well. You know yourself when you are working with a group of children around an activity, and some children pick up what you're asking them to do really quickly. They've got those neural pathways very secure. Some haven't quite established them yet. There's been something that's happened that has meant that those neural pathways haven't been able to join up and haven't been able to become as secure as some of the other children. So therefore, what you're saying to them needs breaking down a bit more. You need to simplify it for them to be able to make a lot more sense. So the two models actually go hand in hand quite perfectly with each other. And again, as we go on to talk about our early intervention criteria, it will make a little bit more sense. So for the children who have an official diagnosis, they've had the medical model of disability recognised, that actually in turn enables the settings that we work in to unlock more funding to be able to work with them and support them more in the classroom environment. So when I'm saying classroom, I don't necessarily just mean school. It could be your nursery environment as well. So the work that you're doing is a lot more supportive because we recognise that there is a medical definition and a need going on, and we adapt our practice in a social situation to be able to meet that medical needs. We aren't just saying this child is in a wheelchair, they can't come to our setting. We are saying, okay, this child is in a wheelchair, we have an official diagnosis that they are in a wheelchair, therefore we are going to adapt our setting to include ramps to be able to get them into the settings. We're going to adjust the level of activities that we're working at, so we're not having things on the floor all the time that they can't get down to. We've adjusted the table heights for them to be able to get their wheelchair under and things like that. So the medical model and the social model go hand in hand to be able to support the work that we do with children a lot more effectively. Okay, so that leads us on to early intervention. Okay, and I know you love my drawing because we're going to do some more drawing. So when we're talking about early intervention, we are talking about recognising that there might be a problem for children as early as possible and putting something in place to be able to help right that problem. So that might be a safeguarding concern, or that might be that you've noticed that there's something wrong with their development, that they're not quite developing as other children are. Okay, so it's really important that we recognise that it whether or not it's from a safeguarding or a development point of view, that we recognise that there's an issue as early as we can, and we put something in place as quickly as we can to try and right that situation before it has an impact on all the other areas and starts escalating. Okay, so it's our responsibility as practitioners to be able to identify if there is a problem and to be able to act on it. So it's not necessarily your responsibility to put those things in place, but you need to be telling the appropriate people in your setting. Okay, so my lovely drawing. When we are talking about early intervention, we look at it in the shape of a triangle. Okay, so this bottom level is universal, so every single child sits at this bottom level. Doesn't matter what they're doing, if they're accessing nursery or not, every child is along this bottom level, and that's why the base of our triangle is bigger, because this is the area that we're going to have the most children in. Okay, bear with me while I draw. Okay, oh, let me write universal, not that you'll see because it would be back to front. Okay, it's back to front, but that says universal. Okay, and then we have the different levels as we go on up through. So this level 1, this first level, it might be that you've noticed in your classroom environment, again, that could be your early year setting, okay, that there's something not quite developing as it should be. So it could be, as the example that we used earlier, you've got a group of children working around you and the instructions that you're giving them don't quite seem to be making sense. They're not understanding what you're doing. So you're going to alter the way you give instructions to that child, because you know they're not picking up things like the other children around them are. So you just adapt your practice ever so slightly. So that's level 1, things that you're doing within your setting to be able to support that child. So it might be that they're having trouble picking up phonics or something like that. So you're going to do smaller group work with them to be able to help meet their development. Okay, so again, that might be a few children, but not every child. So our triangle's starting to get a bit smaller. Okay, so level 2 is, actually, we've tried to put something in place for this child and it's not quite working. I think we need somebody else to come and support us do that work, an outside professional. So again, we'll look at those agencies in more detail as we go on through of who they might be, but we need to call somebody else in at level 2 to be able to support the work that we do with children. Okay, and they might come out and they will help us assess the children's needs and to be able to put something in place to be able to support their need. So it might be thinking again to our example that we're talking about with a child with their speech and language needs. It might be that they need to go for some speech and language sessions with a therapist, and that they observe them and they give you recommendations of things that you can do in their setting, in your setting, to help their development. That might be all it takes. Level 3 is a little bit more complex again. We need to have a couple more people involved. There's something that we definitely need to put in place. So it might be that you have your early years Senko come out and do some observations and some assessments of practice. And it also might be that your speech and language therapist is involved. So you probably have more than one agency involved at this level, and you're going to have something called team around the child meetings or TAC meetings. Okay, so making sure that everybody that's working with a child is working at the same level and doing at the best possible things to develop that child as best they can and have positive outcomes for that child. Okay, so again, you can see the triangle's getting thinner. There's not necessarily very many children working at this level compared to this big universal where everybody is at this level. So level 4, the very last level, the tip of the iceberg, not very many people have this. So when you are working at level 4, children have something called an education and health care plan. Okay, so we're EHCP because we're lazy and we don't like saying the big words. Okay, an education health care plan, an EHCP. So that is when children have an official diagnosis of something. All these people at all the different levels have been working, they've been collecting evidence for the child, and somebody said, yes, this is what is wrong with this child. We have given them a medical diagnosis for you to go away and for you to be able to put things in place to be able to support that child. So we have our medical model of disability. Okay, so therefore what we then put into our plan to be able to help children to develop their best possible outcomes and to have the best future ahead of them is how we are going to adapt our practice for our social model of disability. So everything that the diagnosis has said, the assessment has said at level 4, all these people have collected all this information and made a formal diagnosis. We are then going to go away and we're going to put that information in place. Okay, so as you can see, there is a lot of work to do to be able to get to this top level. There are lots of different people that you've had to go through to be able to do this. So that's why we're saying early intervention is really important. The earlier that we can be working on all these things, getting all these things in place for a child, then the better outcomes they have for their future, the more chance they're going to be able to correct these things that have affected their development. So it might be that there's a learning thing in place, that's affecting, so dyslexia, autism, or something like that. So there's something that's affected their learning that way, or it could be a safeguarding concern. Equally, we use exactly the same triangle for early intervention when we're talking about safeguarding, with level 4 being that they're under children's social care, that top layer, that there's something that's definitely needed to be able to intervene, to be able to put children back on the right path. Okay, so as practitioners, we have a duty of care